Hello, aspirants. I hope you are doing well. So, in today's lecture, we'll talk about cost push inflation. But before I talk about cost push inflation, I would like to ask you what are the reasons for inflation in our economy? So, if you see the reasons for inflation in our economy, so number one is demand pull inflation. This is one reason. Number two is cost push inflation. And number three is structural inflation, also known as bottleneck inflation. Okay, so these are the three reasons for inflation. And bottleneck inflation. And that nowadays our economy is worried about inflation. Okay, and if you are reading the newspaper, so RBI used to say to the government that focus on the supply side. So when you are talking about supply side, so they are talking about cost push inflation. So cost push inflation is the one which is dealing with the supply side. So ultimately, right now, again, our inflation has crossed 6% or more than 6%, whatever we have targeted. So you know that our target is to maintain inflation in this range, 4 plus minus 2%, or you can say 2 to 6%. So this is our target that has been given to us. But recently it has touched 6%, or you can say more than 6%. And if you see the year 2022 also, or I can say financial year 2022, so that financial 2022 also you will witness that our inflation was more than 6%. So it took more than 9 to 10 months for the RBI to reduce it to less than 6%, and again it has touched to 6%. And one of the reason that has been given is, or you can say attributed it to food inflation. So you also know that right now, or you can say recently, there was a shortage of tomato in our economy, and that led to rise in the prices of tomato. So it has touched 200 rupees kg, and now this time it is onion. Okay, so keeping these thing in mind, RBI has emphasized this thing that government must focus on supply side. So it is very important to understand what is cost push inflation. Okay. Now, if you see the meaning of cost push, or what it says, when the cost of raw material and other input rises, inflation results. An increase in wages paid up to the labor also leads to inflation. There exists a situation in an economy where inflation is fueled up not because of an increase in aggregate demand, but mainly due to an increase in the cost of producing goods and services. This also leads to decrease in aggregate supply. So if you see this meaning, so can we say that I can divide this into two points or two parts? So if you see the first part is this one, this thing, and this is the second part. Clear? So we have to read in between the lines. So if you see this, when the cost of raw material and other input rises, inflation results, and increase in wages paid to the labor also leads to inflation. So if I decode it, can I say that whenever there is a disturbance in the factor of production, that will be responsible for cost push inflation. Now that disturbance can be due to any reason, or you can say any factor can be there. So if I talk about cost push, so they says you can say disturbance in factor of production. Now factor of production here includes your land and other natural resources. Your land and other natural resources. So when I am saying land, so can I say that if we take the case of agriculture, if there is a shortage of agriculture land, or you can say more and more farmers are leaving their agriculture land, and now their agriculture land is getting converted into non-agriculture purpose. So ultimately this is also responsible for, you can say, less production of food grains. So this is called, you can say, cost push inflation. Similarly, other natural resources, like in India, farming or farmer is dependent on rainfall. So that is why we have a rain fed farming. So in rain fed farming, you will notice that if there is a poor monsoon, so poor monsoon can be like, if you read newspaper, so in newspaper it is written like this, ki this time monsoon is normal. So it means that is required by our farmers. If the rainfall is more than normal or less than normal, so best example you read in newspaper, El Nino, La Nino. So El Nino, La Nino are responsible for disturbing your normal monsoon. So if that is the case, so production is going to get disturbed. So here I am not talking about the concept of El Nino, La Nino. I am here talking about that due to El Nino, La Nino, agriculture production get disturbed. So that is why factor of production. Second, if you see, labor is the another factor. Now, if suppose labor goes on strike, or you can say increase in the income of labor, increase in the income of labor, that is salary. So if anything is there or both are there, so you will see that again the cost push inflation will be there. Clear? So this is what you have to remember. Now next is your physical capital. Now if suppose physical capital, now physical capital means machines needed to produce something. So if their cost is increased, then also inflation will be. And fourth is human capital. So human capital and labor you can take together. Now if suppose we have less entrepreneurs in our economy, so ultimately less product. And again you will see that cost push inflation will be there. So ultimately if I again come to that first part, so you will see that here you are saying that when the cost of raw material and other input rises, inflation results. So why not we say that factor of production? So whenever there is a disturbance in factor of production or change in factor of production, that leads to inflation. Similarly, an increase in wages paid to labor also lead to inflation. So this is what you can say extension of it. So if in future you study cost push inflation, remember that factor of production. Like in demand pool, you know that ki increase in the money supply in the market. So here cost push means factor of production. Now second thing it says that there exists a situation in an economy where inflation is fueled up not because of increase in demand, but mainly due to increase in the cost of producing goods and services. This also leads to decrease in aggregate supply. So here we can say that in cost push, we assume, we keep that or we understand it like that, ki demand is constant, but on the other hand, supply has reduced. So ultimately, in order to ensure a price stability, in an economy, there is necessity or mandatory to have demand supply equilibrium. Means whatever economy is demanding, there should be enough supply for that. So here in cost push, we assume that demand is constant, but supply has reduced. So ultimately, cost push inflation is an outcome of disturbance on supply side, not on demand side. So this is what you have to understand. So this is, you can say, an outcome of disturbance on supply side. Now here, examiner is not interested if this, suppose this question comes in your pre or means. So examiner is not interested to know examples, because in most of the books you will find an example like poor monsoon is responsible for less production of food grains, and now this situation is responsible for shortage of food grains in the market, which ultimately leads to cost push inflation. So normally this example you will find in many standard books. But if suppose question comes, what can be the solution for cost push inflation? So what will be your answer? So if you know, please tell me in comment section. So I'll write a question for you. What can be the possible solution for cost push inflation? See, my question is basically on cost push. It's not on inflation in general. Because when question will be on inflation in general, so there you have to write about all possible reasons for the inflation. Means there you have to write about demand pull, cost push and structural all. But my question is basically with respect to cost push. What can be the possible solution for cost push inflation? Now to answer this question, first we have to understand why there is a cost push inflation in India. Okay, so ultimately here I'll add one other thing is that what can be the possible solution for cost push inflation in India, because every economy has its own, you can say, solution, but our focus is on with respect to India only, or you can say Indian economy only. Okay, so to answer this question, first you have to understand why there is a cost push inflation in India. Okay, why there is a cost push inflation in India. Okay, or you can say reasons for cost push inflation. Now, if you see that in India, 60% of the agricultural land is dependent on rainfall for farming purpose or agriculture practice, or you can say only 40% of the agriculture land is having irrigation facility, rest of the land is dependent on rainfall. Okay, so this, if you see, when I am saying 60% of agricultural land is dependent on rainfall, so you can say this is the number of farmers or number of agricultural land which is dependent on rain fed farming. So this is a geographical term you will study in geography, rain fed farming. So this is a concern. Clear? So if you see that whenever there is a poor monsoon, so monsoon cannot be in our hand. So monsoon cannot be in the hand of any government. Monsoon cannot be in your hand, in my hand. So ultimately, whenever there is a poor monsoon, so farmer has to rely on that only. And due to poor monsoon, there is a shortfall or shortage in food grains, or you can say agriculture products. Now, this was a, you can say, this was a reason from so many years, but now or recently there is another new reason, that is climate change. And when I am talking about climate change, my focus is on heat waves. So if you see the year, financial year, or you can say, not say financial year, if you see year 2022, that time we have faced a shortfall in the production of wheat. Shortfall in the production of wheat. So we have seen the shortfall in the production of wheat. Why? Answer is heat waves. Even in this year, we have seen shortfall in the production of tomato. So one of the reason is heat waves. Although other reasons are also there, but one of the reason is heat wave. So this is another thing. This is another thing. Third, I will attribute it to fertilizers. Now, when I am saying fertilizers, what does it mean? What does it mean? Now you know that 3 fertilizers are very important for agriculture purpose, which we call primary fertilizers. NPK. Okay. That is nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. So you will be surprised to know this thing, that when it comes to nitrogen, or you can say urea, India is largest producer, largest consumer and importer also. Okay. So ultimately, producer, consumer and importer. So ultimately we can say that whatever we are producing, that is not sufficient as per our consumption. So that is why we are dependent on consumption also. Now when it comes to phosphorus, you will see that in phosphorus you will observe that 50% is produced in India, whereas rest 50% is imported. Now here also you will see that whatever we are producing in India, for that raw material is coming from outside. Clear? So this is what you have to understood. So directly, indirectly, can we say that for phosphorus we are dependent on foreign country or for imports? Yes or no? So directly, indirectly, because whatever we are producing in India, for that raw material is coming from outside. So we can say that directly and indirectly we are dependent on imports for phosphorus. Next, when we talk about potassium, so with respect to potassium, there is no production in India. So you can say 100% it is imported. 100% it is imported. So if you see, immediately after COVID, there was a shortage of fertilizer. And why? Because we are dependent on, you can say, for fertilizer for foreign country. And again, whenever there is a shortage of supply in foreign country, that is not in the hands of Indian economy. and ultimately prices get increased. And when prices of these get increased, so ultimately that will have a impact on the prices of agricultural produce. Clear? Although no doubt Government of India is giving or supporting farmers in the form of subsidy, but if that prices are not passed on to the consumer or to the farmer, that is through farmer to the consumer, then government fiscal deficit get increased. So government has to balance it. Okay, government has to balance it. So if you see your agriculture part, so in agriculture, fertilizer is one of the important input, and that is for that totally we have to depend. So can I say that we all eat imported foods or imported food or products? Clear? Now, oil seed, another important thing. So if you see oil seed, with respect to oil seed also, more than 50% or I say majority of the oil seed is coming from outside. Okay, so this is another thing. So again, whatever edible oil you have, that is also imported. So India being known as a agriculture country, but despite that, oil seed is coming from outside, either oil seeds or either edible oil, whatever. Okay. Next, when it comes to petrol or crude oil, so you know that majority of our crude oil requirement is also coming from outside India. So this is what again you have to remember. So for crude oil also we are dependent. If you see that Gulf countries, especially Gulf countries, so majority is coming from Gulf countries. Okay. Next, you know that this board in front of me is a part of, you can say, digital India, or you can say electronic product. Whatever or wherever you are seeing me, that is either on your laptop or mobile phone, that is also electronic. Okay. So can I say that now electronic components has become a part and parcel of our life? So without that we cannot survive. Okay, so I am talking about in general for majority people, although some of you say that, sir, I don't use it. But if you are listening me, so definitely you are using it. Clear? So I can say that majority are surrounded by electronic product. Now when I am saying majority are surrounded by electronic product, it means I am talking about semiconductor. So you know that there was a news even nowadays also that shortage of chips. So I'm not talking about potato chips or banana chips. I'm talking about that green color chip used in your mobile phone, or you can say any electronic item. So shortage of chip is responsible for increase in the prices of automobile. Okay. And even electronic components. So ultimately for semiconductor also we are dependent. Clear? So these are the, you can say, essential items. So in one of my previous video, I told you the meaning of inflation. So there I told you that when we are talking about inflation, or when we are discussing about inflation, our focus is on essential goods and services. So whatever I have told you, like agriculture, petrol, that is crude oil seeds, fertilizers, semiconductor. So these are some of the items for which India is dependent. For which India is dependent. And when I am saying the dependency is high, okay, it means whenever there is change in the prices at global level, it is going to impact India in terms of cost push inflation. Clear? So this is what you have to understand. Now, you can have other factors also like labor, as I told you in the beginning, like if there is a strike of labor, okay, so that also is responsible for cost push inflation. If suppose there is a war or pandemic like situation, no doubt it will have impact on all the factor of production, and that will result into cost push inflation. Clear? Now, we need to find a solution for this. So, as a bureaucrat, so those who are watching me, definitely your goal is to crack this exam, UPSC exam. Now, what is the role of bureaucrat? They don't, or they have to first identify the what is the problem or what is the issue, and then they have to find a solution for that also. And solution also depends that solution is a permanent or a temporary one. So if I talk about temporary solution, so normally what government used to do, whenever there is a disturbance in any of the factor of production which is responsible for increase in the prices of essential commodity and ultimately cost push inflation, we have seen that government used to reduce indirect taxes in that case. Okay, so you can say they reduce indirect taxes. For example, if suppose prices of semiconductor which is coming from outside get increased, so what government will do? Government will reduce indirect taxes in order to provide products to the consumer at less price, or you can say not less price, in order to give some relief to the consumer. So for example, if earlier the chip was 5,000 rupees, but now prices has increased, so government will reduce indirect taxes. Either it is GST or you can say custom duty or whatever. Second, we have seen that government has also imposed ban on export. Okay, so government has imposed ban on export. So whenever such situations are there, so you will see that in newspaper these things will come. Okay, government imposed ban on export. So recently onion, so government has, you can say, imposed, like, not with respect to onion, with respect to wheat, government has imposed ban. Even with respect to onion also, even government has increased, you can say, custom duty on onion. Now ultimately when they increase custom duty, so no one is going to buy Indian onions. Why? Because price is high. So automatically it's a directly, indirectly it's a sort of ban only. Okay, so ultimately imposed ban on export. So these are some temporary solution taken by the government, but these temporary solution can work for short time, but ultimately it is not a long term solution. Okay, it is not a long term solution. Why? Because if you see, these are further responsible for increasing the fiscal deficit of the government. Like if I say that when government reduce indirect taxes, it means now government will have less tax collection or reduction in revenue receipts. So when reduction in revenue receipt is there, so it means gap between government expenditure and receipt will increase, so will lead to increase in fiscal deficit. Now similarly, when government impose ban on export, so this will further, you can say, this will lead to this will lead to, you can say, increase in current account deficit. So already we have current account deficit, this will further get exaggerated by imposing ban on export. Clear? So this is what you have to understood. Now we have to look for permanent solution. Now what can be the permanent solution? We are interested in that, and currently government is working on that permanent solution. Now if you see the permanent solution, what can be the permanent solution is, number one, government, if you see your syllabus, so there it is written buffer stock. So FCI has been given a responsibility to maintain buffer stock. So if you see the buffer stock part, okay, so government has maintained a buffer stock whenever there is a shortage of food grains. Whenever there is a shortage of food grains, we have seen that immediately from the buffer stock, food grains are released into the market. So buffer stock responsibility has been given to FCI, Food Corporation of India Limited. So this is what you have to remember. Similarly, currently government is focusing on domestic manufacturing of fertilizer. So we have come out with one special scheme, that is PM Pranam scheme. PM Pranam scheme. So we have a PM Pranam scheme also, where central government is emphasizing the state's government to come out with the alternate of fertilizers. So ultimately, we try to reduce our dependence on foreign fertilizers. Or if you see that if we produce fertilizer in our country, you will observe one thing, that when you produce fertilizer in your country or in our country, that is within the Indian territory, you will see that the cost of production will be less as compared to what we import. So this will help Indian economy in multiple ways. Number one, less input cost, government subsidy will also get reduced. So you do one thing, that try to see or try to find out from the Google that how much subsidy government of India is giving on urea. And if you find out, please comment me in comment section. I am waiting for your reply. Okay. Number 3. So this is basically PM Pranam, you can say alternate to fertilizers. So we are looking for reducing our dependence on fertilizers. Number 3, government has come out with, you can say, palm oil mission, or you can say mission on palm oil. So ultimately this is, you can say, reducing our dependence on oil seeds, because when you produce something in your country or in our, that is in Indian territory, it means we will produce at less price. Next, if you see, when it comes to palm oil, after that you will see that we have also talked about semiconductor mission. So semiconductor mission also reduce our dependence. And finally, we, with respect to crude oil, we have strategic petroleum reserves. Strategic petroleum reserves. So for example, we have a strategic petroleum reserve in Karnataka, in Odisha, in Rajasthan, plus other places also. So again, you have to tell me that in the comment section, where is strategic petroleum reserve. So this topic is of basically geography. So you have to tell me, okay. And whatever strategic petroleum reserve we have, how many of them are operational and how many of them are under construction. So I'll wait for your answer, okay. And lastly, what we are doing is, that is blending of ethanol with crude oil, or you can say petrol. That is blending of ethanol. So this is what we are also doing to reduce this thing. Okay. So this is about this lecture. So I hope you find it beneficial. So Jai Hind and have a nice day.